The moment Flavia Tirsa crossed the threshold of her husband's house, she had no understanding that Rome had already begun remaking her. Not as a person, not as a daughter, but as a legal object shaped by custom and expectation. The house was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, as if sound itself had been instructed to withdraw. Flickering torchlight crawled across the marble walls, stretching shadows into distorted forms that bent and twisted unnaturally. They clung to the stone like memories that refused to be buried, moving with each draft of air as though the walls themselves were alive. Her bare feet slid across the cold floor, each step cautious, each movement restrained. The marble carried the chill of centuries, a reminder that countless others had walked this same path before her. Her hands trembled despite her attempts to control them. She pressed her fingers together, willing them into stillness, but the shaking returned again and again, betraying her fear. Behind her stood 7 figures. They were arranged with precision, positioned as carefully as objects placed on an altar. None spoke. None offered reassurance. Their faces hovered between light and shadow, stripped of individuality by the torchlight. They watched her not as a young woman entering marriage, but as witnesses observing the fulfillment of a requirement. Their expressions carried no malice, only detachment, the kind born of repetition. She had been told this was tradition. She had been told that every bride before her had done the same. She had been warned that refusal would disgrace her father, dissolve the marriage before it truly began, and condemn her to permanent dishonor. But no one had told her what the tradition demanded, not during the celebrations, not during the prayers, not until the cloth was lifted from the wooden structure standing silently in the corner of the room. Flavia Tirsa was 18 years old, living in the 49th year of Emperor Domitian's reign. Rome at that time was a city of contradictions, glorious and cruel, disciplined and merciless. Its streets were lined with temples of marble and monuments to conquest. Its laws were admired for their precision, their logic, their ability to define every relationship and transaction with ruthless clarity. Order was sacred. Ownership was unquestioned. Bloodlines were guarded with obsessive care. Marriage in such a world was not a matter of love. It was an exchange sanctioned by law, a transfer of authority, a means of ensuring legitimacy and continuity. Affection was irrelevant. Consent was assumed, not requested. A woman's role was defined not by her voice, but by her compliance. It did not reside in songs or speeches. It occurred in sealed rooms, far from public laughter, under the watchful eyes of strangers whose purpose was not comfort, but verification. Their presence would later become proof that everything had been done according to law, that nothing had been omitted, that the union was legitimate. Only hours earlier, Rome had filled the streets to celebrate Flavia's wedding. Crowds pressed together beneath the afternoon sun, singing fescennine verses, ancient songs deliberately crude, filled with mockery and suggestion. They were meant to protect against evil spirits, yet their cruelty was accepted as harmless tradition. Young men shouted comments about what Marcus Petronius Rufus, her husband, would do that night. Their laughter rose and fell like smoke drifting above the rhythm of sandals and tambourines. Flavia had walked through it all with her head bowed. Upon her hair rested a flame-colored veil, glowing in the light, a symbol of fire, fertility, and transition. Her hair had been braided into 6 plaits, bound with woolen ribbons exactly as custom demanded. Earlier that day, a lamb had been sacrificed, its entrails examined carefully for signs of divine approval. The gods had been consulted, the omens read. Her father had signed the contracts with steady hands. Those documents transferred Flavia from his authority into Marcus's possession. The language was ancient and unambiguous, the same formulas used for land, livestock, and slaves. When Flavia spoke her single required phrase, she felt its weight settle over her like a sentence. With those words, her name became secondary. Her identity was absorbed into her husband's. All of it had been ritualized, all of it had been public, and all of it had been only preparation. As the wedding procession approached Marcus's home, the sun dipped low, staining the sky a bruised purple. 2 torches burned at the doorway, signaling that this threshold marked more than a change of residence. It marked the completion of the contract. Walnuts were thrown at her feet, symbols of fertility and the abandonment of childhood. They struck the marble with sharp sounds, echoing briefly before silence reclaimed the space. Her mother walked beside her. She did not speak. Her face was rigid, her eyes rimmed red from tears shed in private. That morning, as she tied the final braid, she had leaned close and whispered the only warning she dared offer. Do not resist. Whatever they require, do not resist. At the time, Flavia had not fully understood. When the door closed behind her, she understood everything. The noise of Rome vanished instantly, as if cut away by a blade. Before her stood the assembled figures, each fulfilling a defined role. The pronuba, elderly and unsmiling, stepped forward, the woman entrusted with overseeing the rites. 3 female slaves waited nearby with basins and cloths. A priest stood slightly apart, his expression uneasy, murmuring quiet prayers beneath his breath. An older physician held a leather bag filled with metal instruments, his presence practical and unromantic. And in the corner, partially concealed beneath a drape, stood the wooden structure Flavia had not been warned about. The pronuba took Flavia's arm. Her grip was firm, efficient, devoid of tenderness. The sacred rites must now be fulfilled, she said. The word sacred lodged painfully in Flavia's chest. Roman marriage was not guided by emotion. It was governed by law. A woman's transfer into marriage was treated as a transfer of property, and property had to be inspected, verified, and certified. A bride's virginity was not private. It was evidence, proof that the bloodline remained untainted. Like any legal claim, it demanded confirmation. When the cloth was removed, Flavia understood that nothing about this ritual was symbolic. The structure had purpose. It was designed, maintained, and preserved by tradition. This was not metaphor. It was practice. The pronuba recited words memorized through repetition. Instructions were given calmly, efficiently. The witnesses observed in silence. Their role was not to intervene, but to remember, to later affirm that the law had been obeyed. What followed was an act repeated by Roman brides for generations. An act rarely described directly, hinted at only in fragments by those unwilling to commit it fully to writing. Later centuries would recoil from it, labeling it obscene or barbaric. But in Rome, it was neither scandalous nor rare. It was simply procedure. Afterward, Flavia was washed with scented water. The touch of the slaves was careful but impersonal. Blessings were murmured without warmth. The physician returned, recording his observations on a wax tablet. Earlier that day, he had confirmed her virginity. Now he documented the fulfillment of the rite. His notes would serve as legal record. She was then led into the bedchamber. The door remained open. Privacy was unnecessary. This final stage of the marriage was also subject to witness and verification. Marcus entered slowly. The contract now stood complete. By dawn, the household stirred to life. Flavia dressed in garments meant for a matron, heavier, stiffer, unfamiliar. Clothing that marked her transition from daughter to wife, from individual to institution. For the next 40 years, she lived exactly as Rome expected. She bore children. She managed the household accounts. She supervised servants. She attended festivals and stood beside Marcus during public ceremonies. Her posture was composed. Her veil was arranged flawlessly. Her silence was admired. No one ever asked her about her wedding night, and she never offered to speak of it. Not because it was a secret, but because in Rome, it was normal. The women of Rome lived entire lives inside such silences. And history, written mostly by men, rarely paused to record what was considered ordinary.